When people talk about the origins of central banking, they point to Europe, the Bank of England, the Bank of Amsterdam, ledger books, bonds, and war debts. The story goes like this. Money became complex, so banks emerged to manage it. That story is wrong. Central banking didn't emerge because money became complicated. It emerged because society did. Thousands of years before London financed wars with debt, a civilization in the desert had already solved the central problem of finance. How do you store surplus without destroying social order? They didn't use gold. They didn't use paper. They used food. Because in a world where survival is fragile, the true reserve asset is not what shines, it's what sustains life. This is Titan Edge, where we examine the hidden architecture of money, power, and trust, and why the oldest financial systems still govern the modern world.
Finance cannot exist without predictability. You cannot price risk. You cannot plan investment. You cannot promise tomorrow if nature behaves like chaos. Ancient Egypt possessed something no other Bronze Age civilization had: a river that flooded on schedule. The Nile was not just water, it was a macroeconomic clock. Its flood dictated planting, planting dictated harvest, harvest dictated taxation, labor, and state power. This regularity collapsed uncertainty, and where uncertainty falls, systems rise. Egypt became wealthy not because it was mystical, but because it was measurable. And measurement is the beginning of money.
Egypt did not invent coins. It didn't need to. Instead, it used grain as a unit of account. Wages were denominated in grain. Taxes were assessed in grain. Debts were recorded in grain weights, measured in deben. This is a critical distinction. Money does not begin as objects. Money begins as records. Once a system can measure value abstractly, physical settlement becomes optional. Grain could stay in one place. Claims could move. That is banking.
The true financial innovation of Egypt was not storage. It was centralization. Grain was not left in private hands. It was absorbed into a national system of silos, controlled by the state, audited by scribes. These silos functioned exactly like modern reserve vaults. When a farmer deposited grain, he received a receipt. That receipt represented the claim, not a commodity. Over time, these claims circulated. Not everyone redeemed them. Not everyone needed to. The grain stayed still. The economy moved. This is fractional reserve logic, without numbers, without theory, discovered empirically through administration. The pharaoh did not rule through gold. He ruled through inventory control. The most powerful figure in Egypt was not the warrior. It was the scribe. Scribes tracked inflows, outflows, spoilage, labor obligations, regional balances. They created the first state balance sheet in human history. This is where many systems fail. Because once records diverge from reality, collapse becomes inevitable. As long as the scribes told the truth, the system functioned. When they didn't, the empire weakened. This is not ancient history. This is how all financial systems die.
When harvests were strong, grain was stored. When harvests failed, the state released reserves. This stabilized prices, prevented hoarding, preserved labor productivity. That is monetary policy. Egypt also understood debt and its dangers. When obligations grew too large and threatened social fracture, rulers issued debt cancellations, not out of mercy but necessity. A population crushed by debt cannot farm, fight, or pay taxes. Debt jubilees were not generosity, they were system resets. Modern economies avoid this lesson and pay for it repeatedly.
The Egyptian system did not fail because grain ran out. It failed when trust did, when officials skimmed reserves, when records became fiction, when belief in the backing eroded. Once people doubted the silo, the receipts became worthless. This pattern repeats endlessly. China's paper money collapse, Weimar Germany, the abandonment of gold in 1971, the financial crisis of 2008. Different symbols, same failure mode. Claims exceeded reality.
We no longer store grain. We store debt, data, confidence. But the architecture is unchanged. Central banks still manage reserves, still intervene during crises, still depend on belief. The Pharaohs proved something uncomfortable. Power does not come from conquest alone. It comes from financial coherence. Societies can survive poverty. They cannot survive the collapse of trust. History doesn't repeat, but the machine does. And if you don't understand how it was built, you won't recognize when it starts to fail. Subscribe to Titan Edge, where we don't predict the future. We expose the blueprint.